So welcome to our regular weekly half-hour have a go at the Chief Executive of the Chamber of Commerce event, As You Wish. As ever, I'll do a little bit of an intro on where we are with the various issues, both in terms of the short-term response phase, if I'm now using the Scottish Government's terminology, in the whole crisis, and a little bit about some of the discussions we're beginning to have about the reset, restart, and recovery phase. And then I'll open it up for comments, challenges, questions, etc. On the response side, there are still a number of areas where we are continuing our lobbying activities with both UK and Scottish governments. In particular, some of the items that have not yet found an adequate home in the support structures include the support for SME business owners who had that low salary, higher dividend remuneration package, as advised by accountants. Speaking as an accountant, I can understand as well why that advice was given. So I'm particularly concerned about this one, and it still hasn't as yet been addressed. Equally, we are interested in the continuing development of the CBILS, the Business Interruption Loan Scheme, as it rolls out. We are acutely conscious of A, how slow it is to get on the ground, and B, how big the challenge has been for the banks to get it on the ground, and some of the issues around the viability criteria, which the banks are having to use in accordance with the guidance that's come from government. And so we have been adding our voice to the questions about the extent to which the government's guarantee ought to go up from 80% to nearer the 100% in order to try and ensure that there's more access for loans than is perhaps available at the moment. We are again acutely conscious that from our own business impact tracker survey work with British Chambers of Commerce, that this is exactly the time when those who are saying that we have a limited amount of cash are really running up against the buffers, and we're seeing rejections coming through from the banks because of those viability criteria, and we're asking, well, what do businesses that fall into that category therefore do? What's their option? We're also very interested in the job retention scheme, because we are conscious of how important that is to so many businesses that have had to close completely or have seen their income streams drop, as indeed has ours, and the extent to which that means we can keep folks in jobs. So we were very strong in the lobbying through the British Chambers of Commerce on the extension of the job retention scheme, now to the end of June, and the extent to which we were engaging with the HMRC to make sure that the system was in place for registration, which started on Monday. So far, the system has held up, and the HMRC are saying that it is all fine. There will be no problems with the system now that it has been operated for 3 days, and that we should expect to see payments emerging in bank accounts on that scheme on Tuesday, as they've gone through their 6 days of checking on the validity of the applications. But we should expect to see the money beginning to appear on Tuesday. We are still engaging with the UK government as well on some specific sectoral issues, notably with aviation. It's a particular concern to us about the long-term future of tourism and of so much of the hospitality industry, the creative industries, the major events, the extent to which our international connectivity through the airport and the airlines will be in a position to recover after the crisis is something we are still lobbying hard on with UK government. We're very acutely conscious also, though, that Scottish government did make the decision to give rates relief holidays to the airports, and we welcome that. We've also been in discussion still with Scottish government on a few issues that are still pretty regularly coming up from members. One is on the pace and speed at which the small business grants are getting out into bank accounts. And again, we're working very closely with the City Council to continue to support them in making the effort that they're making to get that out. And they have had challenges, system challenges, and the speed at which they've been able to get the system up and running has been a challenge. But we are in regular contact with them about the progress on the distribution of the grants. So we hope very soon to be able to give an update on the actual figures for that. Don't have them today, but hope to be able to publish them later on the week. We've also been continuing to argue around some of the rateable value issues that, you know, a number of companies that have said the 51k threshold level is unfortunate if you're a city centre business in particular, and we've continued to make arguments to suggest that a little bit of flexibility around that for many of those who fall below the 51k, sorry, fall above the 51k rateable threshold are not big businesses. So we're keen for that to continue to be reviewed by Scottish and UK governments. And we are also becoming more aware, more alert to the issues of comparative, consistent messaging between Scotland and the rest of the UK about the attitude towards lockdown. We can understand the position that the Scottish Government's taking on public health crisis comes first, but as we move through the crisis and start to move to the discussions about when lockdown might be released, we're going to have discussions about what it takes for businesses to be able to come back into action, some of whom, particularly some of the larger businesses, are trying to do so now. And we are beginning to see a bit of a disconnect between what the Scottish Government is saying in black and white and what we're actually hearing coming out of ministers' mouths. And that is causing some concern for businesses who are going out of their way to invest in new processes and new approaches to social distancing and where they can get PPE, the use of PPE. So we are very conscious of that issue. We're also talking a lot more about what the recovery process looks like. So in the longer term, we have been raising the issues with the UK government about just how important it's going to be to use the job retention scheme with a bit of we need a bit of a landing runway on the job retention scheme. The idea that we might just bring that to a cliff edge stop at the end of June does scare the pants off us, because we know, well, two things really. One is, well, what is the possibility that Scotland decides to have a longer lockdown? To what extent might the job retention scheme have to be reflective of any geographical differences in lockdown release? But also, we all know that the discussion, these traffic light systems of red, amber, green, for which sectors may open earlier in a release of lockdown process, means that some sectors may be in lockdown for a great deal longer. We have to be asking, can the job retention scheme be maintained beyond a process where lockdown easing begins? Because several businesses, many businesses, I would have to say probably thousands of businesses, would be at risk of laying people off, or indeed stopping completely if the job retention scheme simply comes to a cliff edge end. So we're vigorously arguing the case with Westminster on that, again through the British Chambers of Commerce. We're also beginning to ask some more questions about what does recovery look like and what mechanisms should we be using to help with recovery. And certainly at a Glasgow level, we had set up within the Chamber, the Glasgow Business Resilience Council, asking a variety of our members to give us feedback on what they thought the issues would be that we'd have to tackle as we looked at a process out of lockdown. We are now happy to report that the City Council has convened a COVID-19 economic recovery group, emergency economic recovery group, which pulls together many of the mechanisms that have been in place for some time in the city: the Glasgow Economic Leadership, Glasgow Partnership for Economic Growth, the Glasgow Economic Commission, a whole variety of, for different reasons, these mechanisms have been in place to promote long-term economic strategy. These are now being combined through a smaller mechanism for the time being, which we'll contribute to, which is asking the questions about what does the city region as a whole have to do to support economic recovery, and what messages would be going to UK governments collectively, UK government, Scottish government collectively from that group. We'll feed in much of what we've learned from member comments and member issues to that group and from our business impact tracker survey work. I'd also say that we are very keen to promote ideas that come direct from members that look as if they're absolutely bang on the money. So I see Leslie Thompson sitting there in the group, and Leslie made some fabulous suggestions about possibility of a collaborative exercise with government agencies to do what you might call business remodeling program of support, which might help businesses, particularly SMEs, deal with the challenges of reopening with social distancing and with the health and safety measures that they might need to cope with, but equally asking, well, what we learned from this exercise the last 5 weeks or so of operating in a much more digital online environment, to what extent might there be support for businesses to remodel themselves to reflect online delivery and how they survive in an environment where social distancing maybe looks like it will be an issue for some considerable length of time. And the idea of repurposing existing monies within agencies, whether at the local or the national level, to run a really substantial support program for a whole range of businesses from all sectors to be able to go through that, to get the best guidance from government and from its agencies on how best to avoid falling into the traps that have been set for businesses that do want to try and open, or indeed how to cope if you're not allowed to open physically. I think that sounds to me like one that we would be very keen to vigorously promote. Leslie will have the opportunity in another 2 minutes to come back and explain that in more detail if she so chooses, but that's exactly the kind of steer that we're looking for, that helps us debate with national, local and city level government on how we should all act together to encourage and to make sure that Glasgow and the Glasgow business community comes out of this as healthy as any, if not healthier.